A leading African cardinal is calling out African liturgy for being too African. Join us with the latest from the Eternal City, Church Militant's Rome correspondent, Dr. Jules Gomes. Jules, who is this African cardinal, and where did he voice these concerns about the African liturgy?
Brad, we are talking about Cardinal Robert Sarah, who is quite the celebrity, who was handpicked by Pope Francis in 2014 to be the prefect for the Vatican Congregation for Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments. Now, Cardinal Sarah is in Senegal, in Dakar, and in the cathedral on Monday at a conference, the first conference, in fact, on African liturgy to mark the 60th anniversary of Sacrosanctum Concilium. He was talking about the African liturgy being more African than Catholic and the danger of that. And you can see, we will just watch a sample from the Zaire Rite Mass presided over by Pope Francis in Advent 2019 to see what he's talking about.
Well, that's quite a colorful liturgy, Jules. So what were Cardinal Sarah's specific concerns with the African liturgy?
Well, he said at the conference, he said, we are working to sprinkle African and Asian elements into the liturgy, thereby distorting the Paschal mystery that we celebrate. And he said, in Africa, we place so much emphasis on these cultural elements that our celebrations often last 6 hours. Our liturgies are often too noisy and too banal, too African and less Christian, he said.
You know, it's not surprising. It makes sense that that Cardinal Sarah himself would have such concerns, as he has been calling for really, a God-centered liturgy for, for several years now, actually.
Well, he has been opposing this, and he said, something along the lines of, if you look at the liturgy as a practical matter of pastoral efficiency, we run the risk of turning it into a human work, a set of more or less successful ceremonies. And he said, for 60 years, we know that after the liturgical reform of Vatican II, there's been great idealism and great hopes, and priests and people, there's been basically an avalanche of improvisation and creativity rather than remaining faithful to what God has actually given us.
That's a very big point right there, Jules. In the seminary, we listened to Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, and he was talking about the liturgy as a gift that needs to be handed on and not tampered with. Sarah has really been an advocate of sacred silence, the sacred silence in the liturgy, as well as in man's personal prayer life. He even wrote a book aptly titled The Power of Silence. Seems like the African liturgy, as well as many other liturgical variants in various cultures around the world, have a tendency to drown out that delicate voice of God. Did Sarah recently address this particular aspect as well?
Oh, absolutely, Brad. He said this. He said, look at how we celebrate the Mass today. We often just chat among ourselves. The priest talks and leaves, leaving no silence. And this is what he told a Swiss website in 2021 in an interview. He also went on to say, in Africa, we have a lot of dancing, a lot of applause, but can we dance in front of a dead man, referring to Jesus? And the book you're talking about The Power of Silence, written in 2017, he said, I'm an African. Let me say clearly, the liturgy is not the place to promote my culture. Rather, it is the place where my culture is baptized, where my culture is taken up into the divine. He said that the power of silence in the liturgy militates against the dictatorship of noise in our culture today.
God bless him. You know, of course, the emphasis in the last 60 years really has been about enculturation, where music and symbols of local culture are supposedly baptized into the liturgy, but it seems like these things have had the effect of secularizing often the liturgical ceremonies and even making it, even at sometimes what we'd say vulgar or common. Is Cardinal Sarah trying to reverse that whole process?
Absolutely. He talked about how in the West, the liturgy has become so secular. It's resulted in the dismantling of faith and piety handed down to us. And instead of a frequent renewal of the liturgy, the genuine liturgy, he says, we are witnessing a destruction of the forms of the Mass.
Yeah, you know, when Cardinal Sarah, he was, you know, made cardinal by Benedict, and it was Benedict himself when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, that was talking about the banal on-the-spot fabrication, which was kind of a hallmark of many liturgical ceremonies across the world. Pulling away from Africa per se for just a moment, Jules, you also are quite familiar with India's liturgy, the Indian Rite Masses. What parallels do you see there in India and its liturgies might be running in tandem with the problems that they have in the African liturgies?
Brad, the problem is far more serious in India, and I've written about this many, many times. Because what happened was in 1969, the Vatican, Annibale Bugnini, the famous man who revolutionized the liturgy, was heading that department, and he gave permission to Indian cardinals and bishops to basically enculturate the liturgy by using explicitly Hindu symbols. So the so-called Indian Rite liturgy, basically it's not Indian, it's Hindu, because India is so diverse religious-wise. It contains all forms of worship elements that have scandalized most Catholics and are so explicit that if a Hindu would step into that worship, the Mass, the Hindu would think this is a Hindu puja, a Hindu ceremony going on. And this liturgical form is being pushed down the throats of seminarians. It's, celebrated in practically every seminary across the country. It pushed down the throats of nuns and novices in convents, and it has also resulted in alienating faithful Catholics from the church. They think that instead of drawing Hindus to faith in Christ, the church is going now and capitulating to Hinduism. But ironically, it has also irked militant Hindu leaders, the Hindu fundamentalists, who say that Catholics are engaging in a form of cultural appropriation. Even worse, it has alienated Catholics who come from the Dalit backgrounds, the untouchable castes. And because they say we escaped the Brahmanical tyranny of Hinduism to find liberation in Christianity. And now all we see is the church Hinduizing itself in a Brahmanical manner. So it's been scandalous. And thank God Cardinal Sarah is warning against the, over-enculturation in both African and Asian liturgies. He knows what's going on.
Jules, I have one more question here, and it's about this ecumenism. A lot of this cultural appropriation in the West here, we're trying to make our ceremonies look Protestant. So, the idea was that the Protestants would feel at home when they come into the liturgy and say, well, it's not too much of a step away from Martin Luther and what he had going on or what have you. in the like say in India, you know, where they want to say, well, we need to make it, you know, culturally appropriate for all of the indigenous people there, and so does that form of ecumenism really work? Because if, you know, there is no difference, why do I need to come in? Why can't I just stay where I'm at? You know, there is no really, you know, take down all of the boundaries, all of the fences. You think the sheep are just going to wander into the fold, but it seems like the sheep just tend to wander away from the fold. Your thoughts on all that?
Brad, your question makes me smile. Because when I was chaplain, you know, of the Royal Naval Chapel in Greenwich, and I did a Latin Mass every Sunday as an Anglican priest, we had some of the most glorious choral music Sunday after Sunday, while the local Catholic church down the road was doing Kumbaya. And Catholics were coming into my services to hear a Haydn or a Mozart or a Palestrina four-part Mass, and you know, much of it was in Latin. And they used to say, "Well, you are more Catholic than the Catholics." So, and then of course now I wander into Catholic churches and I see them borrowing the worst of Protestant, you know, the so-called happy, clappy, contemporary Christian music. So it's a kind of upside-down world. And I think Martin Luther would be cringing at, you know, modern Roman Catholic worship today.
Wow, that's something. Well, Cardinal Sarah really is a spiritual giant who wants nothing more than God to be praised by man in the liturgy and for man to be blessed by God in that same liturgy. We would do well to listen to him in this day and age when it seems like the liturgy has become, as Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger once bemoaned, a banal on-the-spot fabrication. Jules, thank you so much for bringing Cardinal Sarah's wise insights to us. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Brad.
Thanks again for watching today's episode of Rome Dispatch. This show is brought to you by donors like Real Estate for Life. If you're looking to buy or sell a home and want to support our mission, visit realestateforlife.org. Again, that's realestateforlife.org. Be sure to tell them Church Militant sent you. God bless.